Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we bring you 7 of the most disturbing true horror stories from the men and women who protect America's first national park, Yellowstone. These are not campfire tales or urban legends. These are documented accounts from park rangers who encountered something that defied explanation in one of the most remote and dangerous wilderness areas in the United States. Each story has been gathered directly from ranger testimonials, incident reports that were never made public, and verified through supporting documentation that most people will never see. Yellowstone spans over 2 million acres of untamed land, where geothermal forces bubble beneath your feet and wildlife outnumbers visitors by thousands to one. It is a place where people disappear without a trace, where the wilderness holds secrets that authorities would prefer remain buried, and where those who patrol its vast backcountry sometimes witness things that cannot be written into official reports. If you are drawn to authentic horror content rooted in real events, subscribe to Buried Files and then hit the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the darkness that exists just beyond the marked trails. Now settle in as we descend into the shadows of America's most iconic yet mysterious national park. I have been a backcountry ranger at Yellowstone National Park for 11 years. In that time, I have responded to countless emergencies that most people only read about in headlines. I have performed CPR on tourists who suffered heart attacks at high elevation. I have documented bear maulings where grizzlies defended their territory against hikers who ventured too close. I have stood at the edge of thermal pools where visitors slipped on wet boardwalks and fell into water hot enough to dissolve human tissue in minutes. I once spent 3 days searching for a man who walked away from his family at Old Faithful and was later found deceased from exposure in a snow-covered ravine. I witnessed one suicide at the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, where a young man climbed over the safety railing and jumped 300 feet into the river below. These experiences hardened me. They taught me that nature is indifferent to human life, and that tragedy in the wilderness rarely resembles the sanitized versions presented in visitor safety videos. But nothing in my training, nothing in my years of experience, nothing in the countless emergency response scenarios I practiced prepared me for what I discovered at Pelican Creek in the summer of 2019. It was early June, just after the spring snowmelt when backcountry camping permits are issued for the more remote regions of the park. The days were long and warm, but the nights still dropped below freezing in the higher elevations. This was the season when experienced backpackers push deep into areas that see perhaps a dozen visitors all year. Pelican Creek is one such area. It sits in the northeastern section of the park, accessible only by a grueling 7-mile hike from the nearest trailhead. There are no maintained trails beyond the first 2 miles. Navigation requires map and compass skills that most casual hikers do not possess. The terrain is unforgiving. Dense lodgepole pine forests give way to marshy meadows where you sink to your knees in mud. Grizzly bears are common. Cell phone reception does not exist. It is the kind of place where if something goes wrong, you are on your own until someone notices you are missing. And that could take days. The call came through on my radio at 6:30 in the morning. Dispatch informed me that a day hiker had reported finding an abandoned campsite near Pelican Creek. The hiker said the tent was still standing, the bear canister was full of food, and camping gear was scattered around the site, as if the occupant had simply vanished mid-meal. This was concerning, but not unprecedented. Sometimes campers get spooked by wildlife and abandon their gear to hike out faster. Sometimes they get injured and leave everything behind to seek help. I grabbed my pack, loaded it with medical supplies and emergency communication equipment, and started the hike at dawn. The trail was muddy from recent rain. I moved quickly, covering the first 4 miles in just over an hour. The forest, was quiet except for the occasional call of a raven and the distant rush of Pelican Creek swollen with snowmelt. As I approached the reported coordinates, I began looking for signs of bear activity. Fresh scat, torn up logs, claw marks on trees. If a bear had raided the camp, there would be evidence. But I saw nothing. The forest felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. I have spent enough time in the backcountry to trust that instinct when the wilderness goes silent. I found the campsite exactly where the day hiker had marked it on his GPS. The tent was a high-end mountaineering model, expensive and well-maintained. It was properly staked and the rainfly was secure. But the back panel of the tent had been cut, not torn by an animal. Cut. A clean vertical slash approximately 3 feet long, made with a sharp blade. I knelt down and examined the edges of the cut fabric. The slice was deliberate and precise. This was not a bear. This was not an accident. Someone had taken a knife and methodically opened the back of this tent from the outside. Inside the tent, I found a sleeping bag laid out flat. There was blood on the pillow, not a large amount, but enough to indicate a nosebleed or a minor head wound. The occupant's headlamp was still hanging from the tent ceiling. A book lay open on the sleeping pad. Whoever had been here left in a hurry or was forced to leave. I backed out carefully, trying not to disturb potential evidence, and began a wider search of the area. 50 feet from the tent, I found a day pack hanging from a tree branch in a proper bear hang. Inside were a wallet, car keys, and a phone with a dead battery. The wallet belonged to a woman named Sarah Chen, age 29, with a California driver's license. I radioed dispatch with the information and continued searching. The next discovery made my stomach drop. 2 miles east of the first campsite, I found another abandoned tent. This one was older, a budget model that had seen better days. It too had a clean cut through the back panel. The sleeping bag inside had what appeared to be dried blood on the exterior. The camp stove was cold, but had been used recently. I found a permit tag tied to a nearby tree. This campsite had been issued to a woman named Jessica Ramirez 3 weeks earlier. She had filed a solo hiking itinerary for 5 days. According to the permit records, she had checked out on time and driven away from the park. Or at least someone using her vehicle had driven away. I was now operating on the assumption that I was dealing with a crime scene. Multiple crime scenes. I radioed for backup and began documenting everything with my camera. That is when I noticed the tree cache. About 200 yards from the second campsite, someone had built a small platform between 2 pine trees about 15 feet off the ground. It was well hidden and would have been invisible to anyone not actively searching the area. I climbed up carefully and found a waterproof ammunition box secured to the platform. Inside were photographs, hundreds of photographs, all of women, solo female hikers on trails, women setting up tents, women filtering water from streams, women sleeping in their tents, photographed through the mesh doors with a telephoto lens. Some of the photos had handwritten notes on the back, dates, locations, physical descriptions. One photo showed Sarah Chen at her campsite the day before I found it. Another showed Jessica Ramirez on the trail 3 weeks earlier. But there were others. Women I did not recognize. Women whose faces I had never seen in missing person reports. How many others had there been? My hands were shaking as I radioed dispatch again. I provided the GPS coordinates and requested immediate law enforcement response and a helicopter evacuation for the evidence. I was told to secure the scene and wait. But I could not wait. Because as I was climbing down from the tree platform, my radio went dead. Not low battery, not out of range, dead. The screen went black and it would not power back on. I checked my backup handheld radio. Same thing. Both devices, fully charged that morning, were completely non-functional. I was 7 miles from the trailhead with no communication and a growing certainty that I was not alone. The footsteps started about 5 minutes later, soft and deliberate. Someone walking slowly through the forest approximately 50 yards to my west, moving parallel to my position. I froze and listened. The footsteps stopped when I stopped. When I moved, they moved. I was being tracked. I have encountered countless wild animals in the backcountry, and I know how they move. This was not an animal. This was a person matching my pace and staying just out of sight. I pulled my bear spray from its holster and started moving toward the main trail as quickly as I could without running. Running would signal fear. Running would make me pray. The presence stayed with me for another 10 minutes. Then the footsteps grew closer. I turned and saw him. A man, maybe 40 years old, wearing hiking clothes that were too clean for someone who had been in the backcountry. He was carrying a coil of climbing rope over one shoulder and a large fixed-blade hunting knife on his belt. His face was calm, too calm. I recognized him immediately. I had seen him at the ranger station permit office multiple times over the past 2 years. He was a frequent visitor who always requested permits for remote areas. He always hiked alone. He always smiled and made small talk about the weather and the trail conditions. I had never thought twice about him. He stopped about 20 feet away from me and smiled that same friendly smile. He said, "Ashton, I know your name from your uniform. You have been looking at my work." His voice was casual, as if we had run into each other at a coffee shop. I kept my hand on the bear spray and told him I needed him to stay where he was. He laughed. Not a threatening laugh, just amused. He said, "You cannot stop this with bear spray, Ashton. And your radios do not work out here. I made sure of that." He held up a small electronic device that I did not recognize. Some kind of signal jammer. I asked him what he wanted. He tilted his head and considered the question. Then he said, "I have been collecting from women who camp alone. They come out here thinking they are safe, thinking the only danger is bears and bad weather. But they are wrong. The real danger is people like me who know how to move through these woods without leaving traces. I have been doing this for 3 years. You found Sarah and you found Jessica, but you have not found the others." I felt my blood turn to ice. I asked him how many others. He smiled wider and said, 3 confirmed. 4 if you count the one from last season who fell into a thermal pool after I chased her there. That one was ruled an accident." He began walking toward me slowly. I raised the bear spray and told him to stop or I would deploy it. He stopped but kept talking. "I will tell you where they are buried, Ashton. I will tell you everything. Because I am done. This is the end game. You found my cache. You found my photos. Law enforcement will be here soon, even if your radios are jammed. I knew this day would come eventually." He reached into his jacket pocket and I tensed, ready to spray. But he pulled out a folded piece of paper. He dropped it on the ground between us and took 3 steps back. 3 locations, GPS coordinates. You will find remains at all 3, near Heart Lake, near Shoshone Lake, near the thoroughfare, all solo female hikers, all reported as accidental deaths or voluntary disappearances. No one suspected murder because nobody expects a predator in a place like this. I did not move to pick up the paper. I asked him why he was telling me this. He said, "Because I want you to know I won. 3 years I hunted in America's most famous wilderness and nobody noticed. And when they finally do notice, I will be famous. People will make documentaries about me. The Yellowstone predator. That has a nice ring to it." He was insane, completely detached from reality. I needed to keep him talking until help arrived. I asked him why he chose this park. He said, "Because it is easy. Millions of visitors every year, thousands of miles of backcountry. Solo hikers are common. When someone goes missing, everyone assumes it was nature. A bear attack, a fall, hypothermia. Nobody looks for a man with a knife." Then I heard it. The distant sound of helicopter rotors. My emergency beacon. I had activated it before my radios died, and I had forgotten about it in the chaos of the confrontation. The sound grew louder. The man heard it too. His expression changed from calm to angry. He looked at me and said, "You activated a beacon." It was not a question. I nodded. He glanced up at the sky where the helicopter was approaching, and then back at me. For a moment, I thought he would charge. But instead, he turned and ran into the forest, crashing through the undergrowth like a panicked animal. The helicopter landed in a nearby meadow 10 minutes later. I guided them to the location and gave a full report. A massive search operation was launched. They found him 16 hours later, hiding in a drainage culvert near the park's east entrance. He had tried to walk out through 30 miles of wilderness, but had gotten disoriented. When they searched his vehicle, they found journals. Detailed journals describing 12 potential victims he had been watching. Maps with marked campsites, lists of names and dates. They found remains at 3 of the 4 locations he had described. Sarah Chen, Jessica Ramirez, and 2 other women who had been listed as missing persons from 2017 and 2018. The 4th location near the thermal pool yielded nothing. The acidic water had dissolved everything. I transferred to a different ranger station 6 months after the trial concluded. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But I cannot do backcountry patrols anymore. Every time I see a solo female hiker on a remote trail, I think about the ones we did not find in time. I think about how easily evil can hide in a place that people associate with natural beauty. And I think about the fact that for 3 years, a predator walked among us wearing a smile and carrying a permit, and none of us knew. The wilderness does not care if you live or die. But at least the wilderness is honest about its dangers. The real horror is that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the woods is not the wildlife. It is the other people. I do not believe in ghosts. Or rather, I did not believe in ghosts until my 3rd season patrolling the thoroughfare region of Yellowstone National Park. The thoroughfare is not a place that casual visitors ever see. It exists in the southeastern corner of the park, where Wyoming borders the Teton Wilderness. If you stand at certain points along the Yellowstone River in this area, you are farther from a road than anywhere else in the lower 48 states. It is 32 miles from the nearest trailhead. There are no cell towers, no ranger stations, no emergency services within a day's hike. When you patrol the thoroughfare, you accept that you are truly alone. Or at least, that is what I believed before the summer of 2017. My name is Quinn. I have worked for the National Park Service for 8 years, and I specifically requested assignment to remote backcountry patrols because I prefer solitude to the chaos of tourist-heavy areas. I am comfortable with isolation. I grew up in rural Alaska, where the nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and winter darkness lasted 19 hours a day. Silence does not bother me. Empty wilderness does not frighten me. I have spent weeks alone in grizzly country without experiencing anything resembling fear. But what happened during those August nights in the thoroughfare changed something fundamental in how I understand the world. It forced me to accept that there are phenomena which cannot be explained by training manuals or rational thinking. The first incident occurred on August 9th. I was on a standard 5-day patrol loop that would take me through the southern portion of the thoroughfare backcountry. My route included checking several designated campsites to ensure compliance with park regulations and to monitor wildlife activity. The weather had been clear for 3 days, and I was making good time. I reached the upper Yellowstone River Valley around 4:00 p.m. and decided to check a campsite that sits on a small bluff overlooking the river. This particular site is rarely used because it requires fording the river twice to reach it. Most backpackers choose easier routes. As I approached the site, I immediately noticed smoke. A campfire was burning in the fire ring. This was unusual for several reasons. First, no permits had been issued for that site in over 2 weeks. I checked the permit log before departing on patrol. Second, the fire was burning cleanly with no one attending it. Third, there was no tent, no backpack, no camping gear of any kind visible. Just a fire burning alone in the wilderness. I moved closer cautiously, scanning the surrounding forest for whoever had built the fire. The area was silent except for the sound of the river and the crackle of burning wood. I called out. No response. I walked a complete circle around the campsite perimeter. No tent, no food cache, no sign of human presence except the fire itself. Then I noticed the boot prints, fresh tracks in the soft earth around the fire ring. They were large, probably a size 11 or 12 men's hiking boot. The tracks circled the fire multiple times and then led away from the campsite, heading north toward a dense stand of lodgepole pines. I followed them for approximately 50 yards until they simply stopped. Not at a rock outcrop where they might have been obscured. Not at the river where someone might have waded away. They just ended in the middle of a game trail, as if the person had evaporated mid-step. I returned to the campsite and extinguished the fire. It had been burning hot and recent. The coals were still glowing red beneath the ash. I estimated it had been lit within the past 2 hours. I left a citation notice at the site for illegal camping without a permit and continued my patrol. I assumed I would find the mystery campers somewhere along the trail ahead. Perhaps they had wandered off to explore or to use the bathroom and would return to find their fire extinguished and the citation waiting. It was a violation, but not particularly concerning. People sometimes bend the rules in remote areas, thinking no one will notice. The next morning, I broke camp at sunrise and continued north along the river. Around noon, I reached another designated campsite approximately 8 miles from the first location. As I crested the small rise that led to the site, I stopped. Smoke. Another campfire burning alone with no visible camp setup. This was no longer a coincidence. This was deliberate. Someone was either following me or moving ahead of me, building fires at every campsite along my route. I approached cautiously with my hand on my bear spray. Again, I called out. Again, no response. The fire was fresh and burning hot. The same boot prints circled the fire ring. The same tracks led away into the forest and stopped abruptly 40 yards from the campsite. I radioed dispatch. I reported the situation and requested information about any other rangers or park personnel in the area. Dispatch confirmed I was the only authorized person in that section of the park. They checked for research permits or wildlife monitoring teams. Nothing. I was told to continue documenting the incidents and to report any contact with the individual responsible. I extinguished the second fire, photographed the boot prints, and moved on. But I was no longer comfortable. Something about the precision of the tracks ending in impossible locations bothered me deeply. I have tracked animals and humans for years. Tracks do not simply vanish unless someone is deliberately obscuring them, but there was no evidence of that. No brushed-out prints, no careful stepping on rocks. Just footprints that stopped as if the person had been lifted into the air. That night, I made camp at a location off-trail about 3 miles north of the second fire site. I did not use a designated campsite. I wanted to be somewhere unpredictable in case someone was tracking me. I set up my tent in a small clearing surrounded by thick forest. I ate a cold dinner because I did not want to build a fire and signal my location. As darkness fell, I sat outside my tent and watched the stars emerge over the mountains. The Milky Way was brilliant in the lightless sky. I felt the familiar peace that comes from being far from civilization. But that peace did not last. At 3:47 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. Slow, deliberate steps circling my campsite. I lay completely still and listened. The steps were heavy, boot steps, not animal paws. They moved around my tent in a clockwise direction, pausing occasionally as if the person was examining something. I reached slowly for my headlamp and bear spray. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought whoever was outside would hear it. The footsteps completed one full circle and then stopped directly in front of my tent door. I could see the shadow of a person silhouetted against the fabric by moonlight. A tall figure standing motionless. I shouted, "This is a National Park Ranger. Identify yourself." No response. The shadow did not move. I unzipped my tent door quickly and shone my headlamp at the figure. Nothing. No one there. I scrambled out of the tent and swept my light across the entire campsite. Empty. The forest was silent, not even the usual night sounds of birds or small mammals. Just absolute silence. I checked the ground around my tent. Boot prints. The same size 11 or 12 prints I had seen at the 2 fire sites. They circled my tent twice and then led away into the forest. I followed them with my flashlight. 20 feet from my tent, they stopped. Same as before. Just ended mid-stride on flat ground with no explanation. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. I sat with my back against a tree facing my tent with my bear spray in one hand and my satellite communicator in the other. I considered activating the emergency beacon, but I had no physical threat to report. Just footprints and a shadow. At first light, I packed my gear and continued north at a rapid pace. I wanted out of the thoroughfare. I wanted to reach the trailhead and file a formal incident report with details that made sense. But the incidents were not over. On the 4th night of my patrol, I was camped at an official site near the southern boundary of the thoroughfare region. I was exhausted from 3 nights of minimal sleep and hypervigilance. I fell asleep around 9 p.m. despite my anxiety. I woke at 2:30 a.m. to orange light flickering against my tent walls. Fire. I rushed outside expecting to find my campsite ablaze. But it was not my fire ring that was burning. Approximately 100 yards away, down a slope near the river, another fire was burning brightly. I could see the flames clearly through the trees, and I could see a figure sitting beside it. A person sitting completely still, facing away from me toward the river. I grabbed my flashlight and started down the slope. As I got closer, I could see more details. The person was wearing dark clothing. They sat on the ground with their knees pulled up, arms wrapped around their legs, head down. They did not react to the sound of my approach. I called out when I was about 30 feet away. "Park Service, I need to speak with you." No response. No movement. I moved closer. 20 feet, 10 feet. I was now close enough to see that the person was wearing an old-style ranger uniform, the kind that had not been issued since the 1960s or 70s. Dark green wool with a campaign hat sitting on the ground beside them. I stopped. something was profoundly wrong. The air around the fire felt cold despite the heat of the flames. My breath formed visible clouds. I said, "Sir, I need you to respond." The figure slowly raised its head and turned to look at me. I will never forget what I saw. It was not a face. Or rather, it was a face. But it was wrong. The features were blurred, as if I was looking at someone through frosted glass. The eyes were dark voids. The mouth did not move, but I heard a voice. It did not come from the figure. It came from everywhere at once, a whisper that filled the forest. This is where it happened. I ran. I am not proud of that. But I ran. I crashed back up the slope to my campsite, threw my gear into my pack without bothering to break down my tent properly, and started hiking north in the darkness. I used my headlamp, and I moved as fast as the terrain allowed. I did not look back. I hiked for 6 hours straight until sunrise, and then I kept hiking. I reached the trailhead 14 hours later, far ahead of my planned schedule. I was scratched, exhausted, and probably dehydrated, but I was out. I filed an incident report that I knew sounded insane. I reported the fires, the footprints, and the figure by the river. My supervisor listened without interrupting, and then asked if I had been experiencing any health issues or medication side effects. I understood what he was really asking. Was I having a mental health crisis? Was I hallucinating? I told him I was physically fine and that I knew how my report sounded. He told me to take a week off and to follow up with the park psychologist. I agreed because I wanted answers as much as he did. During that week, I did research. I accessed historical park records going back to the 1960s. I found an incident from August 1964. A ranger named Thomas McKinley had drowned while attempting to ford the Yellowstone River in the Thoroughfare region. His body was recovered 3 miles downstream from his last known campsite. The recovery team found his gear still at the campsite with a fire burning in the ring. According to the report, McKinley had been camping alone and had left his site to ford the river at night for reasons unknown. His body was found wearing the uniform of that era, dark green wool. The report included a photograph. I recognized the face despite the blurring I had seen. It was the same person. I returned to work after my week off, but I requested reassignment to a different patrol area. My supervisor approved without asking questions. I think he was relieved. But before I left, I spoke quietly with 2 other veteran rangers who had worked the thoroughfare for years. I asked if they had ever experienced anything unusual in that area. Both became uncomfortable. One told me that every ranger who has worked that region long enough sees the fires. They appear annually on August 12th, the date of McKinley's drowning. No one investigates them anymore. No one hikes down to see who is sitting beside them. It is an unspoken understanding that some patrols are best left incomplete. I do not work the thoroughfare anymore. I patrol different regions of Yellowstone where the strangeness is limited to wildlife and weather. But I know the fires still burn every August. I know the footprints still appear circling campsites in impossible patterns. And I know that Ranger McKinley is still out there, sitting by his fire, waiting for someone to understand what happened. I do not want to be that person. I have accepted that there are places in this park where the dead do not rest, and I am content to let them keep their vigil undisturbed. The thermal basin off Norris Geyser should have been empty. It was February. Temperatures had dropped to 20 degrees below zero, and no permits had been issued for backcountry winter camping in that zone for 3 weeks. The area was officially closed to overnight camping from November through April due to unstable thermal features and extreme weather conditions. So when our helicopter pilot radioed that he had spotted smoke rising from the restricted zone during a routine flyover, we knew something was very wrong. My name is Declan. I have been a law enforcement ranger at Yellowstone for 6 years, and I have dealt with every variety of permit violation imaginable. Tourists who ignore trail closures to get closer to bison, hikers who camp illegally in thermal areas and end up with third-degree burns, people who drive off-road or vandalize geothermal features. Most violations are born from ignorance or arrogance. But what we found at Norris Basin that February was neither. It was something far stranger and far more disturbing than anything in my training had prepared me for. I was paired with another ranger named Foster for the investigation. We loaded our gear into packs and began the ski approach at first light the following morning. The plan was to ski 9 miles into the closed area, document the illegal camp, issue citations, and escort whoever was out there back to civilization. The temperature was brutal. Wind chill put us at 35 below zero. The kind of cold that burns exposed skin in minutes and turns your breath into ice crystals that hang in the air. No rational person would choose to camp in these conditions. That should have been our first warning that we were not dealing with rational people. The ski took us 4 hours through deep powder and across frozen streams. The landscape was otherworldly. Steam from thermal vents rose into the frigid air, creating pillars of mist that glowed orange in the low winter sun. The ground beneath us was a patchwork of snow and bare earth, where heat from underground kept the surface above freezing. We could hear the distant rumble and hiss of geysers, and smell the sulfur that permeated everything in this part of the park. As we got closer to the coordinates the pilot had marked, we began to see tracks, ski tracks, multiple sets leading in from different directions, all converging on the same location. We crested a small ridge and looked down into a shallow basin dominated by a large boiling mud pot. What we saw made us both stop. 7 tents were arranged in a perfect circle around the mud pot, each tent positioned exactly the same distance from the center. The precision was unsettling. This was not a casual campsite. This was deliberate, intentional. The tents were high-quality expedition models, the kind used for winter mountaineering in extreme conditions. But there were no ski tracks leading away. No one was visible. Just 7 tents surrounding the thermal feature like some kind of ritual arrangement. Foster and I exchanged glances. He keyed his radio and reported our position and what we were seeing. Dispatch acknowledged and told us to proceed with caution. We skied down into the basin and approached the first tent. I called out, identifying ourselves as park rangers and requesting that whoever was inside come out and speak with us. No response. I unzipped the tent door and looked inside. Empty. No sleeping bag, no gear, just elk bones. Hundreds of elk bones arranged in geometric patterns across the floor of the tent. Skulls positioned at cardinal points, ribs laid out in spiraling formations, vertebrae stacked in precise towers. We checked the second tent. More bones. These were deer bones mixed with what looked like coyote skulls. The third tent contained only bird bones, thousands of them, sorted by size and type. Each tent was a bone repository, meticulously organized. But it was the center of the circle that made my blood run cold. A deer skull had been mounted on a wooden pole and planted directly above the boiling mud pot. The skull was decorated with painted symbols I did not recognize. The mud below churned and spat, occasionally throwing scalding droplets onto the snow around the perimeter. Foster discovered the journal in the fourth tent. It was a leather-bound book filled with handwritten entries in English, mixed with symbols and words, in a language neither of us could identify. The entries described something called feeding the old breath, and references to opening the steam door. There were diagrams showing the tent arrangement and detailed notes about lunar cycles and thermal activity patterns. One passage read, "The pact must be maintained every 40 years when the earth shivers. 7 shepherds return to the sacred steam. 7 offerings of bone to calm the fire below. If the ritual fails, the mountain will wake angry." We were photographing the journal when we heard it. Chanting, low and rhythmic, echoing from somewhere in the thermal features. The sound seemed to come from the steam vents themselves, rising with the sulfur-laden vapor. Foster and I moved toward the sound, following a narrow path between pools of boiling water. The chanting grew louder. Then we saw them. 7 figures emerged from the steam like apparitions materializing from fog. They wore elk hides draped over their shoulders, the heads still attached, creating grotesque hoods. Their faces were painted with white ash in patterns that mimicked the thermal features around us. They moved in single file, each carrying a bundle of bones. The lead figure was a woman, tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed too large for her face. She stopped when she saw us. The others stopped behind her in perfect synchronization. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the hiss of steam and the bubbling of the mud pot. Then she spoke. Her voice was clear despite the wind. "You have entered the sacred circle. You have touched the offerings. You do not understand what you have done." I told her they were in a restricted area and that backcountry camping without permits was a federal violation. She smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who found my words absurdly irrelevant. She said, "We are the shepherds. Our family has kept this pact since before your government claimed this land. We come every 40 years when the earth trembles. We feed the old breath with bones of the forest. We sing the calming words. If we do not, the mountain will erupt. Your park, your visitors, your cities built near the caldera, all of it will burn." Foster asked who they were and where they came from. The woman tilted her head. "We have no names you would recognize. We are descendants of those who lived here before the roads and the lodges. We are keepers of knowledge your science does not possess. The thermal features are not just geology. They are doorways, thresholds, and every 40 years they open wider. We perform the ritual to keep them closed." I explained that they needed to come with us back to park headquarters, that we could sort this out, but they could not remain in a closed area. The woman's expression hardened. "If you remove us before the ritual is complete, you will doom everyone. The seismic activity has already begun. Small tremors your instruments barely register, but we feel them. The mountain is restless. We have 2 more nights of offerings, 2 more cycles of chanting. Then the threshold will seal for another 40 years. Foster radioed for backup. Within an hour, 4 more rangers arrived on snowmobiles. The 7 figures did not resist when we told them they were being escorted out. They surrendered peacefully, gathering their belongings from the tents and dismantling the skull monument. But they said nothing more. They moved in silence as we led them back to the trailhead. When we reached the ranger station, we attempted to process them. They refused to provide legal names. They had no identification, no driver's licenses, no credit cards, nothing. When asked for names, they each said only Shepherd and a number, Shepherd 1 through Shepherd 7. We held them for 72 hours while attempting to identify them through fingerprints and facial recognition. Nothing came back. No criminal records, no missing person reports, no matches in any database. It was as if they did not exist in any official capacity. The federal prosecutor reviewed the case and determined there was insufficient evidence for charges beyond trespassing, which was a misdemeanor. With no identification and no prior offenses, they were released with citations and warnings. That night, they vanished from the county jail holding area. The cell was locked from the outside. No windows, no way out except through a door that required a key card. But when the guard checked at morning roll call, all 7 were gone. The security footage showed them sitting in the cell at 2:47 a.m. At 2:48 a.m., the feed went to static. At 2:49 a.m., the feed returned and the cell was empty. No one entered, no one left. They simply ceased to be there. I tried to forget about it. I told myself they had escaped through some method we had not detected and had fled the area. But then I started researching geological records. I found a pattern. Every 40 years since 1872, the year Yellowstone became a national park, there has been a significant seismic event within 6 months of February. 1912, a magnitude 4.5 earthquake near Norris. 1952, a magnitude 5.3 earthquake that damaged park infrastructure. 1992, a swarm of over 1,000 small earthquakes in the same region. 2018, a magnitude 4.4 earthquake that triggered evacuations of thermal areas due to unstable ground. We arrested the shepherds in February 2019 before they could complete their ritual. In August of 2019, a magnitude 4.8 earthquake struck Yellowstone, centered near Norris Basin. It was the largest earthquake in the park in over a decade. Thermal features changed overnight. New geysers formed, old ones went dormant. One mud pot that had been stable for years suddenly expanded to 3 times its size, forcing the closure of a popular boardwalk. I do not sleep well anymore. I tell myself it is coincidence, that seismic activity in a volcanic caldera is normal and unpredictable, that there is no such thing as a ritual that can influence geological forces. But I cannot stop thinking about what that woman said, that every 40 years, the threshold opens wider. That next cycle is in 2059. I will be retired by then, or dead. But someone will be patrolling that basin in February of that year. And I wonder if they will find 7 tents arranged in a circle, and 7 people in elk hides performing a ritual that our science cannot explain. And I wonder what will happen if we stop them again. I have a degree in wilderness search and rescue from the University of Montana. I understand statistics, probability models, and human behavior patterns in crisis situations. I have studied case files of hundreds of missing person incidents in national parks. I know that most disappearances follow predictable patterns. People get lost when they leave marked trails. They succumb to exposure when caught unprepared in sudden weather changes. They fall from cliffs while taking photos. They drown in rivers swollen with snowmelt. The human body is fragile and the wilderness is unforgiving. But nearly every disappearance can be explained through rational analysis of environmental factors and decision-making errors. What happened to the family at Shoshone Lake in July of 2018 does not fit any model I have ever studied. It does not fit any pattern in the literature. It remains the only case in my 8-year career that I cannot explain. My name is Brielle. I work as a search and rescue coordinator for Yellowstone National Park. When someone fails to return from a backcountry trip, I am the person who assembles the search teams, coordinates helicopter reconnaissance, manages the incident command structure, and ultimately makes the decision about when to suspend active searching. It is a responsibility I do not take lightly. Every missing person represents someone's family member, and I have sat with enough devastated relatives to understand the weight of those decisions. But this case haunts me in ways the others do not, because we never found any trace of what happened. No bodies, no evidence of foul play, no logical explanation, just a family that ceased to exist in a location where vanishing should be impossible. The family was named Whitmore, Robert and Jennifer, both 38, and their 2 children, Emma, age 10, and Lucas, age 7. They were experienced backpackers from Oregon who had obtained a permit for a 3-day, 2-night trip around Shoshone Lake, one of the largest backcountry lakes in the park. Their itinerary was detailed and professional. They had listed their campsite locations, expected mileage per day, and emergency contact information. Robert was a physician. Jennifer was a high school biology teacher. Their gear list showed they were well prepared with appropriate equipment: bear canisters, water filtration, first aid supplies, and satellite communication devices. They checked in at the ranger station on July 14th at 9 a.m., received their permit briefing, and began their hike. They were expected to return by 4 p.m. on July 16th. When they had not returned by 6 p.m. on the 16th, their emergency contact, Jennifer's sister, called the park. Sometimes hikers run late due to slower than expected pace or because they are enjoying themselves and lose track of time. We typically allow a grace period before initiating search protocols. But by 8 p.m., with no sign of the family, I was notified and began assembling a hasty team. We deployed at first light on July 17th. I led a 4-person team directly to their last known campsite at the south end of Shoshone Lake, approximately 8 miles from the trailhead. We reached the site at 10:30 a.m. What we found made no sense. The camp was completely intact. The tent was properly erected and staked. Inside were 4 sleeping bags, laid out flat and unzipped, as if the occupants had gotten up normally in the morning. 4 pairs of hiking boots were lined up neatly outside the tent door. The bear canister was hanging correctly from the food pole and was still full of their remaining supplies. Camp chairs were arranged around a cold fire ring. A water filter sat beside a cookpot near the lake shore. Everything suggested a family that had simply stepped away from camp for a short walk and planned to return. But there were disturbing details. On the camp's picnic table, we found 4 driver's licenses and 4 park entry cards stacked in a neat pile. Beside them were 2 wedding rings, Jennifer's engagement ring, and a child's plastic friendship bracelet, all arranged in a precise line. This was not normal behavior. People do not remove their identification and jewelry and arrange them geometrically before going for a hike. Underneath the ID cards was a handwritten note on a page torn from a journal. The handwriting analysis later confirmed it was Jennifer's writing. The note contained only 1 sentence. "We heard the calling. We are going below." I immediately radioed for additional search resources. We expanded the search perimeter and began systematic grid patterns around the campsite. We searched the shoreline in both directions. We checked the forest. We looked for any sign of the family, tracks, disturbed vegetation, torn clothing, anything. A thermal pool sits approximately 50 feet from the campsite. It is a small feature, maybe 8 feet in diameter, with water temperature measured at 180 degrees Fahrenheit and a pH level acidic enough to dissolve organic material. We examined it carefully, but found no disturbance in the mineral deposits around its edge. No footprints. No indication anyone had approached it. We brought in cadaver dogs on day 2 of the search. The dogs are trained to detect human remains and can alert on scent even if a body is submerged or buried. Both dogs indicated interest at the thermal pool but refused to approach the water. They would walk to within about 10 feet, sit, and whine. Their handlers described it as unusual behavior, as if the dogs sensed something but were afraid to get closer. We requested dive team support to search the pool, but the request was denied due to safety concerns. The water temperature and acidity make diving impossible. Any diver entering that pool would suffer catastrophic injuries within seconds. On day 3, a geological survey team arrived with ground-penetrating radar. They wanted to map the thermal pool to understand its structure. What they discovered was remarkable and terrifying. The pool connects to an unexplored cave system. The radar showed a vertical shaft dropping approximately 40 feet below the visible pool, then branching into multiple horizontal passages that extend in several directions. One passage runs roughly 4 miles to the northeast before the radar signal weakened and they lost definition. The cave system is flooded with the same superheated acidic water as the surface pool. It is completely inaccessible. No human could survive entry, and no robotic equipment we have can function in those conditions. The search expanded to 40 square miles over 9 days. We deployed helicopter reconnaissance with thermal imaging. We had over 60 personnel combing the area. We checked every trail, every drainage, every meadow within a reasonable distance from the campsite. We found nothing. No clothing, no equipment they might have carried, no sign that 4 people had walked through the forest. It was as if they had vanished from the campsite itself without taking a single step. I interviewed other campers who had been in the area during that time period. A couple camping 2 miles north reported hearing unusual sounds on the night of July 15th. They described it as a low humming or vibration that seemed to come from underground. It lasted for several hours starting around midnight. They said it made them feel nauseous and disoriented. Another solo hiker reported seeing lights near Shoshone Lake that same night. Not flashlights or campfires, but a blue-green glow that appeared to emanate from the lake itself or from beneath it. He said he watched it for about 10 minutes before it faded. Both reports were logged, but neither seemed directly related to the Whitmore family disappearance. We officially suspended active searching on July 25th after exhausting all reasonable search areas and methods. The case was classified as a missing person investigation, with suspected foul play ruled out due to lack of evidence. The FBI took over jurisdiction and conducted their own investigation. They found nothing we had not already documented. The case remains open but inactive. The Whitmore family is still listed as missing. Their vehicle was towed from the trailhead parking area and eventually returned to family members. Their home in Oregon remains as they left it, filled with vacation plans and summer schedules that will never be fulfilled. I have led 47 search and rescue operations in my 8 years with the Park Service. I have found lost hikers after days of searching. I have recovered remains from cliff falls and drownings. I have solved disappearances that initially seemed mysterious, but proved to have mundane explanations. But the Whitmore family simply vanished. 4 people, including 2 children, gone without a trace from a campsite that showed no signs of struggle, no evidence of wildlife attack, no indication of anything except a deliberate decision to leave their identities behind and go somewhere. The note haunts me more than anything else. We heard the calling. We are going below. What calling? Below where? The thermal pool is the only feature near that campsite that goes below ground level. But no one could enter that pool and survive. Yet the cadaver dogs indicated something was there. The geological survey showed passages extending for miles underground. And witnesses reported strange phenomena the same night the family disappeared. I do not believe in supernatural explanations. I am a scientist. I trust data and evidence. But I cannot explain this case using any framework I understand. Sometimes late at night when I cannot sleep, I think about that unexplored cave system beneath Shoshone Lake. I think about where those passages lead and what might exist in the superheated darkness miles below the surface. I think about a family that heard something calling to them. Something compelling enough that they removed their wedding rings and left their identities behind to answer it. And I think about the fact that we will never know what happened. Because the only place they could have gone is somewhere no living person can follow. They tell you about the physical dangers when you sign up for winter ranger duty in the backcountry. The cold that can freeze exposed skin in 3 minutes. The avalanches that bury entire valleys under tons of snow. The grizzly bears that wake from hibernation, angry and starving. The distance from any medical facility, any backup, any help if something goes wrong. They brief you on hypothermia protocols and emergency extraction procedures. They check your gear 3 times and make you demonstrate proficiency with a satellite communicator. They warn you about the wildlife and the weather and the isolation. But they do not tell you what 87 days of total solitude does to your mind. They do not mention that the greatest threat you will face might not come from the wilderness outside, but from something that happens inside your own head when you are completely and utterly alone for 3 months straight. My name is Hayden. I have been a backcountry ranger for Yellowstone National Park for 9 years. I have done multiple winter assignments at remote stations where you spend weeks without seeing another human being. I thought I understood isolation. I thought I was prepared. In December of 2020, I volunteered for a winter posting at the Thoroughfare Patrol Cabin, which sits in the most remote section of the park. The cabin is 32 miles from the nearest road. It is accessible only by horse in summer or by ski in winter. No snowmobiles are permitted due to wilderness designation. No helicopters except for emergencies. Once you are stationed there, you are truly cut off from everything. The assignment runs from December 1st through mid-February. 87 days. You are resupplied once in early January when another ranger skis in with food and fuel. Otherwise, you are alone. The cabin itself is small. 1 room with a wood stove, a bunk, a table, and basic supplies. There are shelves with books left by previous rangers. A radio that connects you to park headquarters for scheduled check-ins twice weekly. Solar panels that charge a battery system for minimal electricity. Your duties are simple. Monitor wildlife, document weather conditions, watch for poaching activity, maintain the cabin, and survive. I arrived on December 3rd after a grueling 2-day ski trek with a pack weighing over 80 pounds. The ranger I was replacing looked exhausted. He helped me unload my gear, gave me a quick tour of the cabin systems, and then he left within an hour. He barely spoke. I asked him if he had any advice for the winter ahead. He looked at me with bloodshot eyes and said only this: "Do not go outside at night unless absolutely necessary, and do not trust what you hear." The first month was manageable. I fell into a routine: wake at dawn, stoke the fire, melt snow for water, eat breakfast, ski a patrol route, return to cabin, record observations, read, cook dinner, sleep. The days were short. Sunrise around 8 a.m. and sunset by 4:30 p.m. That left over 15 hours of darkness each day. The silence was profound. No traffic sounds, no aircraft, no human voices. Just wind through the pines and the occasional howl of a wolf pack in the distance. I had brought books and a journal. I wrote extensively about what I saw during patrols. Elk herds moving through valleys, wolf tracks in the snow, the steam from thermal features creating ice crystals that hung in the air like diamonds. But in week 6, things began to change. I started hearing footsteps outside the cabin at night, distinct sounds of boots crunching through snow, walking around the perimeter of the cabin in slow, deliberate circles. The first time it happened, I assumed it was an elk or a moose. Large animals sometimes approach buildings in winter looking for shelter from wind. But when I looked outside the next morning, there were no tracks. The snow around the cabin was pristine and undisturbed. I told myself I had imagined it, that the wind had created sounds my brain interpreted as footsteps. The footsteps came again 3 nights later. This time, I was certain. Someone was walking around the cabin. I could hear each step clearly. The weight, the rhythm. I grabbed my flashlight and bear spray and opened the door. Nothing. No one there. I shone the light in all directions. Empty forest. Fresh snow that had fallen that afternoon showed no tracks anywhere near the cabin except the path I had made earlier returning from patrol. I stood in the doorway for 10 minutes listening. Complete silence. I went back inside and locked the door, even though locks are meaningless in wilderness this remote. Who would I be locking out? By week 8, I began seeing something at the edge of the tree line. A figure standing motionless about 50 yards from the cabin. I would notice it at dusk just as the light was fading, a dark shape among the trees. Too tall to be a stump, too still to be an animal. I would watch it through the window. It never moved. After several minutes, I would look away to grab binoculars or to stoke the fire. When I looked back, the figure would be gone. Or sometimes it would be closer, still motionless, still watching. One evening, I convinced myself to go outside and investigate. I put on my coat and boots, grabbed a flashlight, and walked toward where the figure had been standing. There was nothing there. No tracks. No broken branches. Nothing to indicate anyone or anything had been present. The knocking started in week 9. 3 deliberate knocks on the cabin wall, always at 2:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I would wake instantly and check my watch. The knocks were loud enough to wake me, but not aggressive. Just 3 measured impacts against the exterior wall on the east side of the cabin. Knock, knock, knock. Then silence. I would lie in my bunk listening, but the knocks never repeated. In the morning, I would go outside and examine the wall. No marks, no indication anything had struck the wood. I tried to rationalize it. Thermal expansion of the logs as temperatures fluctuated. Ice falling from the roof. Branches blown by wind. But none of those explanations fit the consistency and precision of what I was hearing. And the timing was always exactly 2:47 a.m. to the minute, every time. In week 10, I found my ranger uniform hanging from a tree branch 100 yards from the cabin. I discovered it during morning patrol. My official uniform shirt and pants neatly hung as if on a closet hanger, swaying gently in the breeze. This was impossible. I was wearing my only uniform. I checked when I returned to the cabin. My uniform was in my pack where I always kept it. I had not taken it outside. I had not hung anything on trees. Yet there it was. An identical uniform, same size, same wear patterns, hanging in the forest as if placed there by someone who knew exactly where I would walk. I radioed headquarters during my next scheduled check-in. I tried to explain what was happening without sounding insane. The ranger who answered suggested I might be experiencing stress and asked if I wanted early extraction. I said no. I had signed up for 87 days and I would complete the assignment. But I asked if there was any history of unusual incidents at this cabin. There was a long pause. Then the ranger said that some winter assignments had been terminated early due to ranger welfare concerns. But he could not discuss details. He reminded me that isolation affects people differently and that requesting extraction was not considered a failure. I stopped sleeping through the nights. I would doze in short intervals, but wake frequently. Week 11 brought something new. I woke at dawn to realize I was outside, not near the cabin, not on the porch. I was 200 yards away in the forest, standing in 2 feet of snow, wearing only my thermal underwear. My feet were bare. The temperature was 15 degrees below zero. My feet were already numb and turning white. I ran back to the cabin, stumbling and falling. I got inside and spent an hour warming my feet in lukewarm water to prevent frostbite. When the feeling returned, the pain was extraordinary. But worse than the pain was the realization that I had walked outside in my sleep with no memory of doing so. I could have died. If I had walked farther, or if the temperature had been colder, I would have died. I went outside later that morning to examine my tracks. They formed a perfect circle around the cabin. I had walked in a circle 23 times, each circuit following the exact same path. The tracks were evenly spaced, mechanical, not the wandering path of someone confused or disoriented. I had walked with purpose, repeating the same pattern over and over, before finally stopping in the forest. I also found something else. My journal was sitting on a rock outcrop 50 feet from where I had stopped walking. The journal I kept in the cabin. I retrieved it and opened to the last entry. Beneath my final notes from the previous day was new writing, my handwriting. Words I did not remember writing. I am not alone. I have never been alone. There are 7 of me now. I radioed for emergency extraction. I told headquarters I needed immediate removal from the station. The ranger asked if I was in medical distress. I said I was not sure, but that I could not stay any longer. He said the earliest they could arrange helicopter extraction was 3 days due to weather conditions and availability. I had to wait. I barricaded myself inside the cabin. I did not go outside except to get firewood. I did not sleep. I sat at the table with my knife and bear spray and counted the hours. The figure appeared at the window on the second night. Not at the tree line, at the window. A face pressed against the glass looking in. My face. My exact features staring at me from outside. I shouted and ran to the door. When I opened it, nothing was there. But in the snow beneath the window were footprints. Boot prints identical to mine. The pattern matched my boots exactly. The prints led away from the cabin in a straight line and then stopped after 20 feet. Just stopped. The way Quinn's mysterious tracks had stopped in the thoroughfare. The way everything unexplainable in this place seemed to end without resolution. The helicopter arrived on the morning of the 3rd day. The pilot said I looked wrong, that I appeared to have aged 10 years. I was 34 years old, but he said I looked 44. I saw my reflection in the helicopter window. He was right. My hair had gone gray at the temples. Deep lines around my eyes that had not been there 11 weeks earlier. The park psychologist conducted an evaluation. Standard protocol for early extraction. She found no evidence of mental illness, no psychotic symptoms, no hallucinations that fit diagnostic criteria. Just extreme stress response consistent with prolonged isolation in a hostile environment. She asked if I would return to winter backcountry assignments. I said no. She noted that in my file and cleared me for return to regular duties. They wanted to send another ranger to the thoroughfare cabin to complete the winter season. I told my supervisor he should burn the cabin down, that it was not safe, that something about that location was wrong in ways I could not articulate. He looked at me with sympathy but did not take my recommendation seriously. 2 weeks later, a ranger named Marcus was sent to finish the winter assignment. He lasted 12 days before requesting extraction. He would not explain why. He filed a report that remains classified. I ran into him 6 months later at a training session. He would not make eye contact with me. When I asked what happened at the cabin, he walked away without speaking. I still work for Yellowstone. I do summer patrols in tourist-heavy areas where I interact with hundreds of people every day. I will never do isolated backcountry work again. And I will never return to the thoroughfare. Whatever exists in that remote corner of the park Whether it originates from the land itself or from something that happens to the human mind when it is pushed too far into solitude, it should be left alone. Some places are not meant for human habitation during the dark months of winter. Some silences should not be broken. And some questions about what we see and hear in the deepest wilderness should never be answered. I need to tell someone about this before it happens again. And I know it will happen again because he is still out there and the FBI cannot find him. My name is Piper. I have been a law enforcement ranger at Yellowstone National Park for 7 years. I have dealt with drunk tourists, poachers, drug trafficking through the park, domestic violence incidents at campgrounds, and one homicide investigation. I thought I had seen the worst of human behavior in a wilderness setting. But nothing prepared me for the case that started in August of 2022 and remains unsolved to this day. Nothing prepared me for the realization that someone had been watching women sleep in their tents for years, photographing them, visiting them, and we had no idea until it was almost too late. The first report came through on August 7th. A woman named Sarah Martinez had been backpacking alone on the Cascade Lake Trail. She was 31 years old, an experienced hiker from Colorado who had obtained a backcountry permit for 3 nights. She completed her trip without incident, returned to her vehicle at the trailhead, and was preparing to drive out of the park when she noticed something tucked under her windshield wiper. Not a parking citation or an advertisement. A photograph. A photograph of herself sleeping in her tent, taken from inside the tent, looking down at her face on the pillow. She brought it to the ranger station immediately. I was the one who took her report. She was visibly shaken. The photo was a standard 4x6 print on glossy paper, the kind you get from any photo processing service. It showed Sarah in her sleeping bag, eyes closed, completely unaware someone was standing over her with a camera. The angle suggested the photographer had been crouched or kneeling beside her. The tent fabric was visible in the frame, confirming this was taken from inside her tent while she slept. On the back of the photo, written in neat block letters with a black marker, was a single word: visited. I asked Sarah if she had heard anything unusual during the nights she camped. She said no. She was a light sleeper and always woke when animals approached the campsite. But she had not heard anyone enter her tent. I asked if she had noticed anyone following her on the trail or camped nearby. Again, no. She had seen other hikers during the day, but no one suspicious. Her campsite had been at a designated location along the east shore of Cascade Lake. It was a popular area during peak season. I filed an incident report and opened an investigation, but I told Sarah honestly that without more evidence or information about the suspect, there was little we could do beyond increasing patrol presence on that trail. 3 days later, another woman filed a similar report. Then another. Over the next 2 weeks, 5 women came forward with identical stories. All solo female hikers. All had completed multi-day backcountry trips on different trails throughout the park. All had found photos of themselves sleeping in their tents, left on their vehicles when they returned. Every photo was taken from inside the tent. Every photo showed the woman asleep and vulnerable. And every photo had the same word written on the back: visited. This was no longer a single incident. This was a pattern. Someone was systematically targeting solo female backpackers, accessing their tents while they slept, photographing them at close range, and then tracking their vehicles to leave the photos where they would be found. The level of skill required was disturbing. To enter a tent without waking the occupant requires extreme care. To do it repeatedly without being detected suggested someone who moved through the wilderness with professional competence. To track the vehicles suggested he was watching the trailheads, documenting license plates and parking locations. I coordinated with FBI agents who have jurisdiction over major crimes in national parks. They reviewed all 5 cases and determined we were dealing with a serial stalker who posed an escalating threat. The current behavior was non-contact surveillance, but the psychological profile suggested someone who might eventually progress to physical assault. They approved a sting operation. I volunteered to be the bait. On August 23rd, I obtained a backcountry permit under a false name. I parked a rental vehicle at the Cascade Lake trailhead and hiked in alone, carrying minimal gear but wearing a concealed body camera and a GPS tracker. I also carried my service weapon and bear spray. 2 backup rangers were positioned at a camp location 1 mile away, monitoring my GPS signal and prepared to respond within 10 minutes if I activated my panic button. I made camp at one of the designated sites where previous incidents had occurred, set up my tent, ate dinner, and pretended to settle in for the night. I did not sleep. I lay in my sleeping bag fully clothed with my hand on my weapon and my eyes barely closed. The body camera was positioned to record anyone who entered the tent. Hours passed. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. I was beginning to think he would not come when I heard it. The softest sound of a tent zipper being drawn slowly open. I kept my eyes closed, but tightened my grip on my weapon. I could hear breathing. Someone was inside my tent. I could feel the presence of another person kneeling beside me. The faint click of a camera shutter. I opened my eyes and sat up in one motion, simultaneously drawing my weapon and activating the panic button. "Federal agent, do not move." The figure lunged backward, crashing through the tent door and into the darkness. I scrambled out after him, flashlight in one hand and weapon in the other. I caught a glimpse of a man running into the forest. I pursued for approximately 50 yards before losing him in the dense trees. My backup arrived within 8 minutes. We conducted an immediate search of the area, but he had vanished. But the body camera had captured his face. When we reviewed the footage, I recognized him immediately. He was a volunteer search and rescue member who had worked with the Park Service for 3 years. He had participated in training exercises. He had access to backcountry permits and trailhead information. He had legitimate reasons to be in the park at all hours. His name was Michael Brennan, age 36, with no criminal record. He lived in a town 40 miles from the park and worked as a wilderness guide for a private touring company. The footage also captured something else. Before he realized I was awake, he had placed something on the ground beside my sleeping bag. We recovered it during the search. It was a binder. A 3-ring binder containing plastic sheet protectors, and inside those protectors were photographs. Over 200 photographs of women sleeping in tents. Some I recognized from the recent reports, but most were women I had never seen. The photos dated back years based on the clothing and gear visible in the frames. Some had handwritten notes on the back with dates and locations. Some had names. Some just had the word "visited." We issued a warrant for Brennan's arrest. Federal agents went to his home the next morning. He was gone. His vehicle was gone. He had packed and fled sometime during the night after the confrontation. A search of his residence found more evidence. A detailed map of Yellowstone and surrounding national forests with campsites marked. A database on his computer listing women's names, physical descriptions, hiking itineraries he had somehow obtained, and notes about their camping habits. Equipment for developing photographs. Climbing gear that would allow him to move silently through the forest. The manhunt lasted 6 days. They tracked him through credit card usage and traffic cameras. He stayed ahead of them, moving through back roads and wilderness areas. On day 6, they located his vehicle abandoned at a trailhead in Bridger Teton National Forest. He had gone into the backcountry on foot. Search teams combed the area for another week. They found no trace of him. Michael Brennan vanished into the wilderness he knew so well. That was 2 years ago. He has never been found. But every few months, another woman in another park somewhere in the western United States reports finding a photograph of herself sleeping in her tent. Different parks, different states: Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Idaho, Oregon, Washington. The photos are always the same format, always taken from inside the tent, always with the word "visited" written on the back in the same block letters. Sometimes there are dates, sometimes there are new notes. One woman found a photo with the message, "You looked peaceful. I almost did not want to leave." The FBI has him on their most wanted list for federal stalking charges. His photo is distributed to every national park and Forest Service office in the country. But he is still out there, still watching, still visiting, still photographing women while they sleep. And I carry the weight of knowing that we had him and we lost him. That the operation I led pushed him further underground and possibly made him more dangerous. I do not camp alone anymore. None of the female rangers in our district do. We travel in pairs for backcountry patrols. We check each other's tents before sleeping. We take turns staying awake on overnight assignments. Because we know he could be anyone. A volunteer, a permitted camper, another hiker passing on the trail, someone who looks friendly and helpful and trustworthy during the day. And then, at night, he becomes someone else. Someone who moves like a ghost through the darkness, entering tents without sound, standing over sleeping women, taking his photographs, and disappearing before dawn. If you are a woman who camps alone in backcountry areas, please be careful. Lock your tent zippers with clips. Place noise-making devices like bells or gravel in a bag near the door. Sleep with bear spray within reach. And if you ever find a photograph of yourself sleeping left somewhere, you will discover it. Contact law enforcement immediately. Because Michael Brennan is still out there, and the FBI believes he will not stop until he is caught or until he escalates to something worse than photographs. I think about those 200 women whose pictures were in his binder. How many of them never knew they were visited? How many of them hiked out of the wilderness, having no idea someone had been inside their tent, watching them breathe? And I think about the women he has visited since then, who will find their photographs days or weeks later, and realize that while they slept, completely vulnerable and alone, a stranger was standing over them in the darkness. My grandfather was one of the first rangers at Yellowstone National Park in 1946, hired as part of the post-war expansion when veterans returned home, and the Park Service was rebuilding its workforce after years of wartime staffing shortages. His name was Robert Spencer Holt. He worked at Yellowstone for 37 years before retiring in 1983, 3 years before I was born. I never met him in life. He died when my father was still young, and all I knew of him came from old photographs and the stories my father told. Stories about a man who loved the wilderness more than anything, who spent his entire adult life protecting a landscape he considered sacred. But in September of 2021, I met him anyway, on the trail to Lone Star Geyser. And what he showed me changed everything I thought I understood about death and about the land we are sworn to protect. My name is Spencer. I was named after my grandfather, carrying his middle name as my first, a family tradition meant to honor the man who had set the path that I would eventually follow. I joined the National Park Service when I was 24, and I specifically requested assignment to Yellowstone because I wanted to walk the same trails he had walked, to see the same geysers he had monitored, to understand what had called to him so powerfully that he devoted his entire life to this place. I have been a ranger here for 6 years. I know the park well, I know its trails, its wildlife patterns, its thermal features, and its dangers. I thought I knew everything about Yellowstone that mattered. I was wrong. The incident occurred on September 17th, 2021. I was conducting a routine patrol on the trail to Lone Star Geyser, a popular but moderately challenging hike that follows the Firehole River for about 2.5 miles into the backcountry. It was a clear afternoon with temperatures in the low 60s. Perfect hiking weather. The trail was busy with day hikers, and I had stopped several times to answer questions about wildlife and thermal features. Around 3 p.m., as I was approaching the geyser itself, I noticed a man ahead of me on the trail. He was wearing a ranger uniform, but not the current style. The uniform was the old design from the 1940s and 50s. Dark green wool with a wide-brimmed campaign hat. The kind you see in historical photographs, but never in actual use anymore. I assumed it was someone dressed for a historical reenactment or educational program. The park occasionally hosts living history events where volunteers dress in period clothing. I picked up my pace to catch up with him, intending to ask which program he was participating in. He turned as I approached and waved at me. A friendly, casual gesture. Then he continued walking. I called out, "Excuse me, sir." He did not respond. He simply maintained his pace, following the trail deeper into the forest. I followed, curious now. The trail to Lone Star Geyser is well defined and straightforward. But he veered off onto a side path I had never noticed before. A faint game trail leading through dense lodgepole pines toward what appeared to be a small meadow. I hesitated. Rangers do not leave marked trails during patrols unless there is a specific reason, an emergency or a report of illegal activity. But something compelled me to follow. I cannot explain it rationally. It felt necessary. I turned off the main trail and followed the man in the vintage uniform into the forest. The game trail was narrow and overgrown. Branches scraped against my pack. The ground was soft with pine needles and moss. After about 200 yards, the trees opened into a small meadow I had never seen before despite patrolling this area dozens of times. The man was standing in the center of the meadow, facing away from me. He pointed down at the ground at his feet and spoke for the first time. His voice was clear, but somehow distant, as if coming from farther away than his physical position suggested. He said, "This is where it happened." I moved closer and asked, what happened? He turned to look at me. I saw his face clearly for the first time, and I recognized him. I recognized him from the photographs I had seen throughout my childhood. The same strong jawline, the same deep-set eyes, the same expression of calm authority. It was my grandfather, Robert Spencer Holt, who had been dead for 38 years. I should have run. I should have been terrified. But I was not. I felt only a profound sense of peace and curiosity. He looked at me for a long moment and then said, "You will understand when you dig." I asked what I should dig for. He simply smiled, a sad, gentle smile, and said, "You will know." Then he turned and walked toward the tree line. I watched him go. He walked with the same deliberate, measured pace. And then he simply vanished. Not faded, not disappeared gradually. He walked into the shadows beneath the pines and ceased to exist between one step and the next. I stood in the meadow for several minutes, trying to process what I had just witnessed. Hallucination seemed the most rational explanation. But I felt completely lucid. I was not tired. I was not dehydrated. I had not hit my head. I was simply standing in a meadow where my dead grandfather had appeared, spoken to me, and vanished. I looked down at the spot where he had been standing and pointing. The ground looked normal, grass and wildflowers and moss, Nothing unusual, but I marked the location carefully using landmarks and GPS coordinates. Then I hiked back to the main trail and continued my patrol in a daze. I did not report what had happened. How could I? What would I say? That I had seen a ghost? That my grandfather's spirit had led me off trail to show me something? I would be sent for psychiatric evaluation. I would be removed from duty. So I said nothing. But I could not stop thinking about it. That night, I reviewed historical records about my grandfather's career. I read his personnel files, which are available to family members through the Park Service archives. I found references to patrols he had conducted, locations he had been assigned to, incidents he had responded to. One entry from 1951 caught my attention. My grandfather had reported his official ranger badge as stolen during a backcountry patrol. The badge was never recovered. He was issued a replacement, and the theft was noted in his file, but never solved. The location where he reported the theft was listed as the Lone Star Geyser area. The date was September 19, 1951. Exactly 70 years and 2 days before I had seen him on the trail. I decided I had to go back to the meadow. I requested a day off and returned on September 20th with a shovel, a metal detector, and ground-penetrating radar equipment I borrowed under the pretense of conducting a geological survey. I found the meadow again without difficulty. The GPS coordinates I had marked led me directly to it. I began scanning the area with the metal detector. Within minutes, I got a strong signal at the exact spot where my grandfather had been standing. I began to dig. The soil was soft and came away easily. At approximately 3 feet depth, I hit something solid. I cleared the dirt carefully and found a metal object wrapped in oilcloth. I pulled it up and unwrapped it. Inside was a ranger badge, an original 1940s-era National Park Service badge, the kind my grandfather would have worn. I turned it over. Engraved on the back was his full name, Robert Spencer Holt. Beneath the badge was a piece of paper, also wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. The paper was yellowed and fragile, but the handwriting was clear. The note read, "For my grandson, when he follows the same path. You will find this when I need you to know I'm still watching the park. Some rangers never leave. We just change how we serve. Keep this with you. It will remind you that this land is more than geology and biology. It is memory, it is continuity, it is sacred. Protect it as I did." Signed, Robert Spencer Holt, September 19th, 1982. The date made my breath catch. September 19th, 1982. 1 year before my grandfather died. 31 years before I was hired as a ranger. He had buried this badge and this note in a meadow off the Lone Star Geyser Trail with the knowledge that someday, somehow, I would find it. He could not have known I would become a ranger. I was not even born yet. But he knew, or he hoped. And he left this message for me. I contacted my father and asked if he knew anything about this meadow or about grandfather burying something. My father was shocked. He said that in the year before grandfather died, he had requested that his ashes be scattered at a specific location in Yellowstone. He had given the family precise coordinates. My father looked them up. The coordinates matched the meadow where I had found the badge. My grandfather's ashes were scattered in that meadow in October 1983, as he had requested. He had chosen the exact spot where, 1 year earlier, he had buried his badge and a note for a grandson who did not yet exist. He had somehow known that I would be drawn to this place, that I would follow the same calling he had followed, and that I would need to know he was still present in the landscape he loved. I carry that badge on every patrol now. I keep it in my chest pocket, close to my heart. And sometimes, late in the evening when the light is fading and I am walking the trails alone, I see that figure in the old uniform at the edge of meadows or standing beside thermal features. Always at a distance, always watching. He never approaches, he never speaks again. He just stands there, a silent presence, keeping watch over his park. I understand now what he was trying to tell me. Some rangers never really leave Yellowstone. We become part of it. Our presence soaks into the soil and the steam and the stone. We patrol these trails long after our bodies have turned to ash and scattered on the wind. And for those who come after us, who carry the same dedication and the same love for this sacred landscape, we remain visible, not as ghosts, not as hauntings, but as echoes of service that never truly ends. I will work at Yellowstone for as long as I am able, and when my time comes, I will ask that my ashes be scattered in that same meadow where my grandfather rests. And perhaps, decades from now, another ranger will walk these trails and see two figures in vintage uniforms standing watch together. And they will understand that this park is more than a job. It is a calling that transcends life and death. It is a promise we make to the land and to each other, to protect, to preserve, to never truly leave.